What is going on, everybody, and welcome back once again. My name is Jordan, also known as JMonster. Thank you for joining me for another replay battle. Today I have a 3 versus 3 on the brand new 0.9 patch for Reforged, which if you guys have not gotten yet, I recommend that you go and get immediately because there is so much that has changed. It is truly a brave new world here in 0.9. There's a ton of new factions and a lot of brand new units as well. We're going to be going over some of the newer factions and some of the newer units in this battle. I think most of the factions in this are some of the newer ones, or they have brand new units. So without any further ado, let's jump right into the army compositions, then we can get into the replay itself. I hope you guys enjoy it. First up, we have a couple forces here sent from Dol Amroth, which really express the length and breadth of the new faction's roster. The first one is under the command of yours truly. I'm bringing a large number of Dol Amroth men-at-arms. You can see them here replete with their armor upgrade, which shows off. I think that's a new model, although it may be from DAC, I'm not too sure, but I think it's definitely new in Reforged. Dol Amroth men-at-arms are really good. They have better stats pound for pound than the average Gondor infantry, although they do have less numbers, so in a straight fight, Gondor infantry and Dol Amroth men-at-arms will pretty well cancel each other out. In behind them, if you guys are familiar with DAC, then you will recognize the Tarnostian Guard when you see them. In Reforged, they are very cost efficient. They have pretty good attack and defense stats, making them decent for supporting your cavalry against other heavy cavalry, but they are also really cheap. I think they cost about 500 to bring, and you can bring about 3 or 4 of them before you get a price increase. So if you're looking to increase the numbers in your army and give yourself a little bit of an extra cavalry edge, and then the Tarnostian Guard are the way to go. In behind them, we have the Tirith Air Marksmen. I believe I have about 3 units of them. If you guys are familiar with the 0.86 patch and beyond, these guys were traditionally associated with Gondor. They have now been broken off and are part of the Dol Amroth faction. And Gondor, don't worry, has been given lots of stuff in return. So the Gondorian roster has a ton of new units and is not going to be kind of strapped for versatility in any way, shape, or form. Also got a single unit of Trebuchet. A thing to note about artillery in this new patch is that they are extremely deadly and definitely worth it to bring in a field battle now. Previously, the biggest use for artillery was making your enemies come to you, which in itself is a useful thing, being able to dictate the terms of your engagement, always something you want to look for as a commander. However, in 0.9, they are more accurate and have an incredible amount of range. The Trebuchet in particular has a lot of range, and you guys will see that once we get started. Over on the other wing, I've got a couple units of the brand new Talon Knights, sort of new. I think these guys are brought in right from DAC, but they are new in Reforged. They are fairly expensive. I think they cost about 1,000 or 1,100 to bring, but they are 2 HP elite infantry, and they've got a ton of attack and defense stats to back it up. They are a little bit low on numbers, however, only about 53, I think, in a unit on normal settings. So it's very easy for them to be overwhelmed if you leave them kind of out on their own. But definitely if you want to put them in your center line, they will hold for a very long time. In behind them, we've got a couple units of Knights of the Silver Swan. These are the mounted counterparts to the Talon Knights. In previous iterations of Reforged, these guys had 2 HP. That is no longer the case in 0.9. They still have a lot of defense, I think to the tune of about 47, and they're very good on the charge, but they're a little bit more fragile, so you definitely don't want to get them within range of AP units like crossbows or javelins. They're a little bit slower, I think, than medium and... Actually, they're significantly slower than medium and light cavalry, so it is possible to outmaneuver them. So they're kind of a trade-off. You need to support them and be careful with how you use them, but if you can use them effectively, then they will do a ton of work for you. Moving on over here, we have the second Dol Amroth force being commanded by Sin of the Dark Cloud, which I think is really appropriate because he's actually responsible for creating a lot of the units that are in his force. So he's bringing some Talon Knights as well, and of course the Trebuchet, but he's got some Valond Halberdiers. These guys are a brand new unit in 0.9, and I think pretty well unique to Reforged. They are really cost efficient. They only cost about 700 or so to bring. They are anti-cavalry and AP with pretty decent melee and armor stats to boot. In behind them, since the Dol Amroth faction does not have access to the Pelargir Marines, Sin of the Dark Cloud created a brand new unit for them. These are the Belfalos Marines. And look at them, looking extremely classy with those beautiful swan-crested helmets. And yeah, they're really cost efficient as well. I think they cost about 800 or so to bring, but they're also really solid melee infantry, like a medium tier infantry, after they've thrown their javelin payloads, which do a ton of damage. I think to the tune of about 17 or so AP missile damage. He's also bringing some Tirith Air Marksmen and some Ne'er-Dell Rangers, units that we are both very familiar with. One thing to note about Archers is that they have a ton more range in this patch but it's not going to be quite so easy for them to take down heavily armored and shielded infantry from the front. A lot of the archers have lost their AP component previously. The elves especially were quite bad for that. Most of the elven archers and archers in general do not have any AP. However, they have more range and they are extremely accurate. In particular, the elven archers are so accurate, I think to the tune of about 90% accuracy, and the elite units like this for Dol Amroth have about 85, which is very, very scary and very impressive. Sin is also bringing some Haven Guard. These guys are still, of course, associated with the Dol Amroth faction, but no longer available to Gondor. They are in kind of the same boat in terms of their usage as the Talon Knights, except that they are not regular line infantry. These are heavy shock infantry, and they make a great support unit, although I wouldn't necessarily put them on the front lines where they would be vulnerable to missile fire. For example, the archers, like I spoke of earlier, are really good at taking down shock units like this that don't have a shield to defend themselves. In the back, finally, Sin is also bringing another unit of Knights of the Silver Swan. So it's a pretty standard force, really nice heavy infantry corps, and some good skirmishers and artillery to boot. Moving on now, we have a brand new faction being played by Saint Toady the Pacifist, one of the mods from the official channel. This is Umbar, and Umbar is definitely focused around its infantry. While they are a sister kingdom to Gondor, the Gondorians are much more versatile and have some really powerful elites, and some fairly decent cavalry options to boot. On the other hand, Umbar is very, very strong in the infantry department, but really lacks solid cavalry options. So it's a bit of a trade-off. So for example, these Castamir's Chosen, who do not cost a whole lot to bring at all, although I think Saint Toady has really doubled down on his infantry here, they have about 3 HP, and you can get 2 of them for a price increase. So Saint Toady has really, I think, paid a lot to bring these units. There's also a brand new unit here. These are the Harbingers of Castamir. They are AP. They make a great General's Bodyguard unit, about 40 attack and 3 HP as well. But they are, again, quite low number, just like the Talon Knights, so it's easy to overwhelm a small infantry force like this. But these Harbingers of Castamir are really, really deadly. He's also bringing a couple units of Aberzanim Nardu Zagar. In previous patches, these guys were kind of not really worth it. They cost a lot to bring, and they didn't have a whole lot of longevity. But in 0.9, they are 2 HP, and they're not AP, but they have a lot of really nice attack and defense stats. Wow, I can't speak today, especially in melee. Although most of their defense, I think, revolves around their melee skill, so you don't want to get them caught out in the open being pelted by archers because they will fall apart really quickly. Saint Toady is also bringing a unit of Naru Royal Guard. These guys are exactly what you would expect they would be, a very powerful General's Bodyguard unit that you don't really want to have necessarily on your front lines, but want to keep in more of a support role or to fill in gaps in your line. Saint Toady is also bringing 3 units of Corsairs. These guys are not as strong as they used to be in 0.86, but they are significantly cheaper. So they make a great fodder unit for soaking up charges and arrow fire. I think they've got like 9 damage and like 7 defense or something like that, and they are extremely unarmored, but they only cost about 150 to bring. So it's really easy to fill out your roster once you've bought a solid elite corps like Toady has brought over there. Toady's also bringing a large number of Corsair Savages. These guys need no introduction. They are the immaculate shock troops of the Umbar faction. Very lightly armored, not very expensive. I think they cost about 250 to bring, but they can do a ton of work if you can get them into melee and on the charge. I think they're also anti-cavalry, which makes them useful potentially for supporting your cavalry units. The very, very few cavalry units that Umbar can bring to the fields against some of the more powerful heavy cavalry factions. Speaking of cavalry, we have a brand new unit here. These are the Warlords of Umbar. This is, I think, the only heavy cavalry pick that the Umbar faction can bring to the table. They and several other factions have also been given the Merchant Cavalry, which has been buffed to be anti-armor, I believe, to give them a little bit of options against cavalry factions so that they're not completely at their mercy, but you're really going to have to support your cavalry. The Warlords of Umbar, I believe, have about 2 or 3 HP and some pretty competitive attack and defense stats, but they are by no means able to take on some of the more powerful factions in the field, like Rohan, for example. And of course, Saint Toady here, he's got a single catapult, which it's pretty nondescript. We've seen the catapult a lot of times before. Unfortunately, they're not. They are lacking any custom models for the Umbar faction for the catapult crews, but I'm sure that will come in the future. But in any case, let's move on now to the other side. Opposite the forces of Dol Amroth and Umbar, we have a faction that has received a major facelift in 0.9. This is Dale, being commanded by Carandol. He's bringing a couple units of Earls, one here, one on the other side. The Earls are pretty well untouched. I think they've got better stats, and but they still have their 2 HP, so they're a really strong cavalry unit. At least I'm pretty sure they have their 2 HP. I don't know. I'm not 100% sure on the stats anymore, because the world has basically been turned upside down, but I'm like 80% sure that they still have their 2 HP. Over here we have one of the brand new units that has been created custom for the 0.9 patch. These are the Dalian Paladins. And look at those maces. These guys are AP shock troops. They and the Swordmasters have fairly similar stats, although I believe these guys have a little bit less numbers, less melee defense, but they have AP damage, which makes them a little bit more deadly on the charge against heavy infantry. We've also got some brand new Lake Town units here. These are the Lake Town Infantry. They're medium tier infantry, not the greatest, but certainly not the worst. And behind them, if you guys are familiar with the Hobbit movies, you'll definitely recognize these guys. We have Dalian Marksmen. These are forces that are native to the city of Dale and are going to be really cool moving forward for custom battles and historical battles and stuff like that. So that's really exciting to see. Out in front, we've got some Dalian Spearmen, basically the same thing as the Dalian Marksmen, but their spear and shield arm counterparts. Luckily, Dale has still managed to conserve some of its Avari units, so they still have access to the Elder Avari Pikemen and a couple of units here as well, like the Lake Town Pikemen. And behind them, we've got some dismounted Earls who really don't need any introduction. We've seen them all before. Behind them, we've got a couple units of Rivermen, really efficient Javelin units, and then we've got some more Dalian Marksmen over there as well. These guys, look at these guys. These are the Dalian Dragon Slayers. They are AP missiles, one of the few AP missiles still left in the game. They can do a ton of work against heavy infantry, but I think they have a very significant drawback in that if you want to use them, you need to expose them to enemy fire. Last I checked, and I don't know if this has been fixed, but when I talked to the developers, this was a conscious choice that they had made. The Dale Dragon Slayers cannot fire over friendly unit formation, so they can't do the indirect fire that you can see that the Dalian Marksmen are doing right now. So you need to have a clear line of sight in order to use them effectively. And finally, Carandol is bringing a single unit of catapults. Moving on now, we have an old fan favorite. These are the Dwarves, being commanded by Heath Horton. He's bringing a unit of Mithril Guard, who are pretty well the same idea as they were in previous patches. They're really heavy infantry that have multiple HP. The Dwarves in particular, they have a lot less numbers than they did, but they also have, I think, most of the really strong HP units that are still left in 0.9. They're also bringing some Sons of the Fallen, and in behind them we have some Erebor Infantry, which is a brand new unit for 0.9. Out in front, we've got some Ironfoot Crossbows. These guys are really good. From what I can remember, they have a shield value that they can use to block incoming missiles, and it's harder for archers to take down heavily armored units, making the crossbows particularly effective at what they do. And with their AP missiles, they are also really valuable for taking down heavy infantry units. Over here we have the Blacklock Engineers, who have they've completely and utterly changed. They essentially fire ballista bolts at this point, but they have very low range. I think probably about the same range as the Javelins, which, by the way, did get a range boost, but still, it does not have to be range at all. And I think they also need to have line of sight in order to fire on their foes. We've also got some Ironfoot Pikemen, and a brand new unit here. These are the Ironfoot Spears. Very reliable spear infantry. If you guys have seen the Hobbit movie, you're going to recognize those guys right away. He's also bringing some Ironfoot Warriors, and in behind we've got some Dragon Slayers of Arid Mithrin and some Dwarven Noblemen. Largely, the Dwarven roster has gone pretty well unchanged. There's a few notable additions, and we've seen a few of them inside of Heath Horton's army already. Moving on over here, we have the army of Harad. And if you guys were looking at the Umbar section thinking, oh my god, Harad has lost all of their elite core units, they're going to be completely and utterly awful, think again. They have received a ton of new units. Sorry, I'm starting a little bit here. New units in compensation for the loss of their Umbar roster. So this is being commanded by D.I. Rohirrim Commander. He's got some self-run warbands. Out front, he's got some self-run archers. I think there's a lot of hidden units in here, so we may not be able to see them right away, but I will point them out as we see them in battle. He's also got a couple units of Serpent Bodyguards, which are now light cavalry, although do not mistake that for weakness. They still have 2 HP, and they are so fast, making them very useful at outmaneuvering some of the more heavy and deadly cavalry units of other good factions. In behind, he's got some Trollmen of Harad, who are a little bit less numerous than their previous iterations, but they are still a very powerful unit nonetheless. He's also bringing some dismounted Serpent Guard, who are a lot cheaper to bring now. I think they only cost about 600 or 700. I don't think they have their 2 HP anymore, but they make a great heavy infantry pick for the Harad faction, which they can back up with some of their brand new units, like these Muhad Beast Tamers, for example. These are pikemen, very, very strong pikemen. They're actually capable of going toe-to-toe with some of the heavier good faction units, despite the fact that they are spears and have that light disadvantage, rather. Over on their flanks, we can see some brand new units here. These are the Muhad Berserkers. I think these guys have multiple HP, and they are also AP, making them very, very strong against heavy infantry units. But they are also quite lightly, more medium armored. So if you can target them early with missile fire, then you can side through them really, really quickly. So it's a bit of a trade-off. You really want to be careful with how you deploy units like this, because, as I mentioned earlier, the archers have a ton more range than they did in previous iterations. And over here on the flank, we've got some more Southron Warband. In behind, we've got another couple units here of the Muhad units who have been just... It's really great to see this model, which is fantastic, kind of used a lot more widely across the Haradrim roster. So DI's bringing some Muhad tribesmen who really don't need any introduction. We've seen these guys in other battles. They are just as strong as they ever were. Definitely a nice kind of medium infantry missile unit. I think he's also got a couple hidden units in here as well. There is one unit called the Devils of the Desert, who are like Trollmen Javelins. They are very low number, but they have like 3 HP and a ton of javelin damage. So I think we're going to see them in this battle as well. But that basically does it for the army compositions. I hope you guys enjoyed this little preview, and that you will consider picking up the 0.9 patch and looking at some of the brand new factions for yourself. There's a lot more than what I showed you here today, and it's going to be it's basically a brand new game. But without any further ado, let's jump right into the replay. I hope you guys enjoy it. Battle is going to get started with an early volley from my trebuchet. You can really see the power that these new artillery pieces bring to a battlefield. Look at this. These Serpent Guard are an extreme distance away. We've already managed to get a few early kills off on these very important units. At the same time, I'm moving forward with a large body of my troops, which honestly is not the best plan. As I mentioned earlier, one of the best things that trebuchet can do for your army is to make an enemy come to you. You can really dictate the terms of your engagement when you have this ranged advantage. And as we can see here, DI really doesn't have any counter artillery. So I can make him come to me, but instead I'm going to move to him, which is going to open up my front line. And at the same time, I've also made a really foolish error, which I'm not going to realize until a little bit later. I've actually left my 2 units of Belfalas Marines here away from my army. I thought I had moved them, but alas, I did not. And I'm going to pay the price for it. A little bit of friendly fire here as well, because I'm still targeting those catapults, but unfortunately my trebuchet has a fairly limited firing arc, so I'm actually going to kill some of my own marksmen at the same time, which is a really big problem. You can see DI now really leveraging the newfound speed on the Serpent Guard. Moving through this pass, he sees the mistake I made, and he's going to move in and try and punish me for it. Let's take a look at what's going on elsewhere on the battlefield. You can see a similar, much more wiser deployment here by Sin of the Dark Cloud. Instead of moving forward to meet his adversaries in the open field where potentially they're strongest, he's going to use that trebuchet to make these slow-moving dwarves come to him. And at the same time, he is bombarding their ranks with his very powerful tier 3 marksman. Not going to do a whole lot to these dwarves, but to these crossbows, they do have an opportunity to kill at least a few of them. But most of the dwarven infantry is very, very well armored and not easily felled by incoming missile fire. Elsewhere, an interesting kind of deployment here. It looks like Dale is moving in on the flanks of Umbar, trying to cut them off. It looks like he might have been trying to move in and support his allies, Sin of the Dark Cloud, over there in the center, but the forces of Dale are not going to allow him that opportunity. But look at this. Look at that trebuchet volley. That is a beautiful thing. Oh, that's going to be devastating. Doing a lot of damage to these 2 units here, the Riverman and the Dalian Marksman. You can really see how useful a trebuchet can be in supporting your allies all the way across the field. It really allows you a lot of power projection in this, so I think we're going to see a lot more artillery in replays to come. Over here, the front lines between Harad and my Dol Amroth forces have now clashed. I've actually made a bit of a micro mistake, and I was moving them forward to about here, which is why you can see the rest of my army now moving forward and not supporting my Dol Amroth men at arms against those Southron Warband. Still, the tide hasn't quite turned against us yet. You can see I've still got a lot of infantry now moving in that are actually unengaged. I've got some Tarnostian Guard and another unit of Talon Knights moving around on DI's left flank, looking to outflank his lines here, but look at this. There's a lot of infantry yet to come. There's some Trollmen of Harad and some Serpent Guard moving in to counter the push from my elites. The Dol Amroth Talon Knights are strong, but they are not strong enough to take on some of the elite units like the Trollmen of Harad, who I think have like 3 HP and are still armor-piercing, one of the few armor-piercing picks that Harad still has available to them. Also, we can see more and more of his infantry pouring in here. These Muhad Berserkers are going to do so much damage to my Dol Amroth man-at-arms, though, at the last minute. We are going to get a charge off. Managed to take down at least a few of them. There's some arrow fire coming in from the Southern archers in the back. Not really going to do a whole lot to my Tarnostian Guard and to my Dol Amroth man-at-arms from the front, but he is actually beginning to envelop my line here, so I got to be really careful about that. Elsewhere, you can see his Serpent Guard have been hard at work murdering my Belfalas Marines that I very foolishly left out here. Javelin men fire a lot faster in this version, and they have a much better range, but regardless of that, I wasn't able to really kill too many of his Serpent Guard before they could get stuck in against my Belfalas Marines and do a ton of damage to them. You can see he's pulled off one of his lower strength units of Serpent Guard. Is going to get into the back where my Trebuchet is sitting unprotected. So DI is really cleaning my clock right now and really punishing me for this inattentiveness over here and leaving my Belfalas Marines undefended and leaving a very large hole here in my lines. I'm moving in with some of my Knights to the Silver Swan, but as I mentioned, these guys are really, really slow, so it is not going to be easy for them to catch up to this very swift Serpent Guard. Also, we can see Sin of the Dark Cloud now beginning to pour a little bit of supporting fire into the forces of Harad, although if he's not careful, he is going to crush my own units, but still, from a distance like this, those trebuchets are very inaccurate, but still, they're much better and much more useful than they were before. All along the line here, DI is doing pretty well. He's really hacking down my Tarnostian Guard, who are just trying to hold down the flank. Meanwhile, his Muhad Berserker's not doing quite so well against my heavily armored Dol Amroth man-at-arms, who are really starting to cut them apart. Over here, though, these Muhad Beast Tamers, pikes from the front in this version are very, very fearsome. Not something you want to throw your regular troops into, and they're doing a really good job at beating back my Dol Amroth man-at-arms. I think it's looking really even between those two units. Elsewhere, a big hammer and anvil strike coming in from these Serpent Guard, who are going to get into the backs of my Talon Knights and begin to side them down. At the same time, those Trollmen of Harad are just cutting them down from the other end. Really, things are a bit of a disaster here. My cavalry still just too far behind, not fast enough to deal with these Serpent Guard light cavalrymen. Elsewhere, you can see some of those Southern Warband have managed to break through, and they are now hammer and anviling in unison. Ooh, a little bit of lag there. Hammer and anviling in unison with the Serpent Bodyguard, who finally my Knights of the Silver Swan have managed to catch up to, but unfortunately they are not going to be able to get a piece of them for very long because those Serpent Bodyguards are going to disengage very, very quickly. Over here, my Knights of the Silver Swan doing really well against these Southern Warband, but there's enough of them, I think, and we did manage to flatten a significant portion of the unit, so if these guys turn around and attack my Knights, who are now just a single HP, that's going to be a really nice trade-off, I think, for the forces of DI. But let's go ahead and let's slow it down just a little bit here. You can see DI still kicking my butt. Elsewhere, Sin of the Dark Cloud doing really, really well against the Dwarves. So you can see the Dwarves kind of got themselves a little bit surrounded. They weren't able to protect their flanks, and so Sin of the Dark Cloud is going to be able to move in and crush them with his armor-piercing units and his Talon Knights here, who are more than capable of holding the line. In the center, these Belfalas Marines, looking like they are out of ammunition, have probably already discharged their volley of javelins and done a ton of damage to these Dwarven units. In fact, I think that's what a lot of this is back here. Yeah, really nice surround going on here for Sin of the Dark Cloud. At least we're winning in the center. Elsewhere, Umbar really doing quite a good job against Dale. Dale's really struggling, I think, because of this nice 1-2 punch. There's a lot of really sturdy infantry here with high attack values, and of course these Corsair Savages. So it looks like St. Todia's got his mainline infantry in here, the ones with HP, multiple pieces of HP, and he's going to move in from behind with his Corsair Savages to support them, which is a really, really hard to beat combination. Although, thanks to what appears to be a oblique formation employed by Dale here, he's really stacked his wing and has begun to drive Umbar back a little bit. The low numbers of these elite infantry starting to, I think, play against the Umbar player. So it's pretty well even. Umbar is winning on one flank and beginning to wrap around and destroy what remains of Dale's infantry, and on the other end, Dale's more sturdy units, like their Dalian Paladins and their Elder Avari Pikemen, are going to turn around and do the same. So they're going to kind of meet in the middle here and I think wipe each other out, essentially. At the same time, Dale still has his Rivermen up and in action, looking like they're taking a big bite out of those Corsair Savages. Not necessarily the best use of their very limited ammunition. The Corsair Savages could very easily be felled by some of the archer companies. But speaking of, it looks like they have their hands full. Those Dalian marksmen alongside the Dragon Slayers of Dale getting themselves engaged in melee now by a unit of Corsairs. These Corsairs are not going to win this fight, especially not against the Dale Dragon Slayers, who are very, very potent in melee as well as at range. But this is going to tie them up, I think, long enough for Harad to, or rather Umbar, to begin to get an advantage in the main infantry fight. Elsewhere, though, this is where the lack of cavalry is going to start to turn against Umbar. They've got the infantry to win this fight, but Dale still has a lot of Earls left on the field. You can see a very healthy unit of 25 here, alongside another unit of 18. We're now taking on the Naru Royal Archers. Some cycle charges from these units is going to be more than enough to take them down, although luckily for the forces of Umbar, a very healthy unit of Casimir's Chosen now moving in to try and counter the menace that is posed by those Dale Earls. Moving back over onto my side, looks like things not going so great for my infantry. I have managed to win in the center for the most part, although DI has now brought up his reserves of Muhad tribesmen, and things are going to get real ugly for my Dol Amroth men-at-arms. Oh, those poor bastards just getting taken down from behind by those very powerful AP missiles. I'm still not able to lock down those Serpent bodyguards. There is one unit of cavalry still left for me, but it's not going to be enough, I think, to turn the tide of this battle. My Talon Knights now moving in from the rear, looking to deal with what remains of those troll men, try and mop them up and finish them off. At the same time, I'm moving in with my Knights of the Silver Swan. DI is reacting with a unit of Muhad tribesmen who are going to be able to get over there. Not in time to save the Serpent Guard from a nice hammer and anvil charge from my Knights of the Silver Swan, but they are going to be there in time for when I round about and regroup. Oh man, those poor Serpent Guard just got absolutely flattened. A very devastating charge, as I mentioned earlier. Those Knights of the Silver Swan are very powerful in the charge still, but look at this. This is so deadly. The entire unit nearly just falls apart. Nearly full health, now down to a mere 9 from 28 men. That is very, very unfortunate, and that is going to strip me of my most powerful asset still left on the field. And there goes my general falling in battle against some of the Southron Warband. I'm going to try and get in there and finish these guys off with one last charge, but another volley from those Muad tribesmen comes in and really breaks the fighting spirit of my Knights of the Silver Swan, who are now down to 5. Elsewhere, it looks like Dale is really starting to do a number on the forces of Umbar. Umbar has now lost his general. Luckily for him, he's got a lot of elite units left, and thankfully that unit of Casimir's Chosen was held in reserve until very late in the game, which is going to allow Umbar to effect a surround here on the Dalian Paladins and basically everything that remains of Dale's infantry. But the loss of that general, I'm sure, is going to be sorely felt. All it's going to take is like maybe 1 or 2 stray shots from that trebuchet that could potentially begin a mass rout on one of the remaining Umbar wings. Elsewhere, those Dragon Slayers alongside the Dalian Marksmen are victorious against those Corsair Savages. They are still beating them back, but look at the cost that they have paid. A lot of those Dale Dragon Slayers, over half the unit, in fact, have been cut down by those Corsair Savages. You can really see the power of these light infantry. This is exactly what you want to use them for. Get them in there and just try and exchange them for much more expensive units as best as you can. But you really have to worry about arrow fire against these guys. In fact, it looks like there's still a few Dalian marksmen here, but I think they might be out of ammunition. Dale's catapult has really had a hard time, I think, getting itself operational. I think they might have gotten sniped a little bit by that trebuchet. Just look at the range. Look at the range on that thing. That is so deadly. Yeah, it looks like Umbar slowly wiping out what remains of them. The dwarves getting themselves surrounded. Really, the opposing team is losing just about everywhere, except over here where DI has thoroughly thrashed my Dol Amroth forces. Muhad Beasthamers now moving in with what remains of the Serpent Guard to surround my Tier 3 marksmen, who have had to be committed to melee since they are now out of ammunition and I'm completely out of frontline soldiers. So we can see some of my Dol Amroth men-at-arms now fleeing for the hills, being chased down by some Southron archers. All in all, it was a very bloody struggle for both sides, but DI managed to come out on top with a lot more of his skirmishers still intact, in particular the Muhad tribesmen, who, as I mentioned, are quite versatile infantry. Still got some Talon Knights here, wiping out what remains of the Trollmen, but it's not going to be enough. Just 21 Talon Knights to throw into battle against all of these Serpent Guard and these Muhad Berserkers. Things not looking good for my forces. I've still got some skirmishers left. You can see a couple units of Tier 3 Marksmen and some Belfalas Marines. They're going to throw their Javelin payloads down into these Southern Archers as they pursue my Dol Amroth forces across the plains. But at the same time, DI bringing in a unit of Southron Warband, sending them crashing into the side of my Belfalas Marines. Really unfortunate there. These are basically the best troops, I think, that I have left for melee purposes at this point. And they're doing pretty well against those the Southron Warband. Like I mentioned, these guys are really solid melee infantry, but unfortunately with the loss of my general and the loss of so much of my army and being so heavily outnumbered, they are going to start to flee really, really quickly. I'm still trying to exact as much revenge as possible. You can see my Tier 3 marksmen firing into these ranks of Muhad tribesmen who are going to start to spread out a little bit here and move in to deal with what remains of my archer companies. But really, I think it's fair to say that the forces of Dol Amroth and Umbar have definitely won this battle. Sin of the Dark Cloud still is a very, very functional force, and DI and myself basically wipe each other out in terms of infantry. Elsewhere, Dale is now getting completely and utterly decimated by the forces of Umbar. It's only going to be a small amount of time before their forces manage to round on what remains of the Haradrim and begin to push them out of this desert. And there goes Dale's general being cut down by the Castlemir's Chosen. Very, very deadly infantry unit. Alright, let's go ahead and let's fast forward just a little bit. You can see these Muhad tribesmen moving in, trying to get themselves in a position where they can put some fire on my Tier 3 marksmen, who are starting to reap a bloody toll amongst their ranks. I've actually managed to get my trebuchet back up and running at this point, which is a beautiful thing to see. I think I've only got a couple left. Oh, never mind. That must be the trebuchet of Sin of the Dark Cloud, trying to lend me a little bit of aid from across the map. But alas, it is too little too late for my poor army, which is just getting absolutely torn asunder. My Tier 3 marksmen charging into battle against these Muhad tribesmen. We definitely want to exact revenge against these dirty javelin men who have caused us so much problems throughout this match. My poor Tier 3 marksmen, although at this point a lot of these troops are quite tired and very light, so they're really doing not as great as you would expect against those Tier 3 marksmen, but thankfully with the arrival of some of my allies' forces, we're going to be able to scatter these guys, and I am going to have a few marksmen, I think, left at the end of this, to the tune of about 7 or 8 of them. So my army was not completely destroyed, but basically it was shattered to the point of no return. Yeah, 7 Tier 3 marksmen still remaining. What remains of DI's Muhad tribesmen are now going to flee across the field. Sin of the Dark Cloud is going to give chase, and I think elsewhere, basically all the other enemy forces have been completely annihilated. So let's take a moment here and just appreciate the beautiful carnage that Point 9 has brought us. See a lot of those Muhad units falling in battle against the Dol Amroth infantry. My infantry were really out of position and still managed to do very, very well against these lighter Haradrim. The biggest mistake I think I made was moving off of that hill. As I mentioned probably several times throughout this video, the most important part about these long-range artillery pieces is that they can bring an enemy to you and allow you to set the stage for a battle on your terms. But I really didn't take advantage of that. I didn't play to that strength, and I really suffered for it in return. Yeah, let's move on over here. Let's see what happened to the poor dwarves. Oh, that's just devastating. So many of those dwarves died there. Not nearly as many Dol Amroth forces have perished in return. Over here, the fight was a lot more even. You can see a lot of dead Corsairs. A lot of that, I think, is thanks to the very powerful Dalian archer companies. Dale is definitely a powerhouse faction in this new patch, so they are one to keep an eye on. Previously, if you saw Dale in the roster, you were pretty sure you're going to have an easy win, but now Dale can really give you as good as they can get. Yeah, a lot of those forces there now having fallen in battle. And there goes the Haradrim general falling in battle against those Athelon's halberdmen. It is a very crushing victory for the forces of Dol Amroth and Umbar, except for their left wing here, which got itself torn asunder. And there you have it. I hope you guys enjoyed. Coming up next there is going to be... Oh, man, I have so many replays. I'm going to try and get a 12-12 replay out today, and because I was not able to deliver on the 2v2 siege, I have one better for you. In fact, it is going to be a 4 versus 3 siege on the Dol Guldur map, followed up by another 12-12 replay sent in to me by Blood Magpie. And you know it's going to be good because he always sends us the very best violence. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you in the next episode. So take care, everybody. Bye-bye!